All right. So we are continuing today's summit, Disruptive Public Education Summit. And before we start this next topic, we do want to give another shout out to our sponsors. We have Wise Pies Media, which is putting out amazing content around public education. We also have the Educational Leadership Podcast that you can listen to on Spotify and many other platforms. We have over 60 episodes talking with superintendents and board members around the great state of Texas. And lastly, but not least, we want to give a shout out to our other sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's given hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to public education in the form of a free gift. It's zero out of pocket to the district, and it's unrestricted funds. The district can use it for anything, teacher salaries, whatever they may need, and it's recurring revenue that doesn't involve taxpayers. Okay, so today we have our next speaker from Edna ISD, Superintendent O'Connor. How are you doing today?
Good. How are y'all today?
Doing fabulous.
Welcome to our summit. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. So we will step aside and let you take the stage here and kick off the topic today. You just want to share your topic and let's get the conversation going.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we had talked about was looking at hiring, recruiting, et cetera, and the flexibilities of those things that go into attracting people into education, especially when you're talking about a rural district who already is, behind the eight ball in terms of funding. The way that the state funds public schools is, on a per pupil basis. So the fact that we have a smaller population to deal with all of that, we have to go through and look at creative ways to be offering benefits and attract recruiting to people that are looking to go into teaching. So one of the things that we have been able to do, because we're not going to compete with the larger districts in terms of salary, is we have been able to do some things with District of Innovation and been able to work with some people with certification, some flexibility on that. Looked at recruitment of our local kids that come out of college with degrees but are wanting to come home, but maybe that particular degree does not offer them the opportunity to find employment in some of these smaller towns. So alternative certification deals. We actually really talk to a lot of our former graduates and everything else that come back about ways that they can get into the educational field. We've done a lot with para recruitment and retention, which is another population of our former students that are coming through. And they are looking at having to go into the job force a little bit earlier, but we're also working with them to be able to complete the degree while they're working through the school district. So that's been a new program that we've been able to try to enhance that has really paid dividends for us. And we've got probably 5 or 6 really good ones in the process now of getting their degree and certification. We look forward to that. And that also has been an enhancement in us as a recruiting tool to get people into some of those support staff pools that we're really trying to grow. And it gives people that maybe don't have some of the revenue and expenses to be able to go through and enroll in school right away, but we can help them with that through some of our para training. But we also have done a lot with grant writing in terms of the same thing with helping to pay for colleges and doing some dual credit opportunities with students as they're going through and trying to enhance them or entice them into doing some other things. So we've been able to go through and also through some of those grants like ESSA and COVID and whatever else that we were able to find, instead of putting it back into things that we maybe were not able to keep up with the recurring costs, we used it a lot for recruitment and retention bonuses these last 2 or 3 years. which I think has really panned out for us well, because for the first time last year, we lost I think a total of 9 teachers, which is the lowest that has happened since I've been here in 10 years. And I think part of it has been, the recruitment and retention bonuses that we give out around December and May. And also it has been the fact that I think we've tried to do a lot of things in terms of culture building, support for new staff when they come in, as far as mentoring, and not just turning them out and telling them to teach, but actually giving them some resources and people that come in to mentor, instructional coaches that we've invested in the last couple of years that can come in and help out with some of those things, because the teaching business is a difficult job. I think it sometimes gets a little bit of reputation as being something easy and an easy degree to get. But I think any people who have actually went in and tried to conduct class for 7.5 hours with 120 kids rotating through and keeping control, and then also getting them to be productive, they find out that the job is a lot harder than what they think. And so we need those support systems built in so that we can keep people engaged. We also, I think, have gone out, when I first got into this business, it was more of you ended up with a teaching position open, and then you'd advertise for that particular position and try to hire somebody. Right now, I've been very fortunate that the board has trusted me to give me some hiring authority starting usually around January, because what we find is the people who are out looking and are experienced, they're not looking in May and June or April. They're looking early, and so they given me the flexibility to offer some contracts really early and get some people signed up and on the shelf, so to speak. And then what we do is at the end, in the summertime, when we figure out who exactly has resigned or had to move on, or because of family reasons or spouse's job relocation or whatever, then we're able to, with the DOI and the flexibility of certifications, move some people around to best cover those positions as we go. So we've gone out of the 1-for-1. We end up hiring some people really early and taking the chance of getting a few out there, because we've ended up getting some really good people by doing that, and not necessarily looking at it by certification, but looking at hiring a really good certified person. And so what I would say is that has really been the biggest benefit that we've seen in the last few years. And we've been fully staffed for all of this, and which in today's times and in today's particular situations that are happening within the state and everything else, and the support that I think is waning at times for public education, we're happy with the fact that we're able to do that. The other thing that we've been able to do is we've ended up cultivating a cooperative with the other schools that are in the county. And some of these programs, like career and technical education, that take a lot of resources, and you really need a certain number of students to be able to make those things be economically feasible. We've been able to cooperate with them and host different programs in each one of the schools, and have the schools agree to transport those kids to those programs. It's allowed us to cultivate within some of the business community. We've been able to do some business grants. We've been able to cooperate through a foundation that's local to expand some of our shop activities. We're lucky that we have a really strong career and technical ed staff. We also have been able to cooperate with the community college here locally, our junior college, to offer some dual credit opportunities, but also expand our CTE offerings with construction classes, nursing classes, computer classes, and we're actually able to do some AWS certifications, which for a district of only about 1,600 kids, to be able to offer those kinds of offerings, certifications, and on-the-job training opportunities for kids, we feel very confident and comfortable and proud of the fact that we're able to get those things done. You know, academically, we've been able to solicit through the our local educational foundation to do some assistance and scholarship with dual credit opportunities, which I think has paid dividends for us in terms of getting kids that maybe would not have had that thought process of expanding on their school. They have gone ahead and gone on and gone to college either in Victoria or somewhere else and been able to get a degree or certificate or whatever. And so I think all those opportunities have turned out to be a big situation for us. And I think it's been a good calling card. So I think when you put all those things together, I think that's been one of the reasons why academically, I think we have improved a lot in terms of state accountability. We have done a lot with distinctions, designations, so those things have come a long way. And I think that is one of the reasons why I think, when you talk about public schools, there's always a lot of misinformation out there. There's always a lot of places where somebody can come up and point to a deficiency in the system. And there's no doubt there are some. But at the same time, I think the beauty of the public school system is the fact that we end up taking kids from all areas, all socioeconomic situations, maybe even having special needs or special deficits that have to be dealt with. And those places have to exist. And so if you continue to pull resources from those areas that service a large majority of students to push resources into areas that are already servicing kids that probably have more resources at their availability than what a lot of times we're dealing with, then that's where the disparity starts to enter into the equation. Taxes, we'd all like to say that we don't pay taxes and we don't want to pay taxes, but taxes is what does roads, hospitals, prisons, school systems, law enforcement. That is a necessary component that goes through there. I think the state needs to really look at the fact that school taxes take the rap, but there's a large portion of the state budget that gets funded off of school taxes under the umbrella of school taxes that needs to actually be dealt with, and so that it's not the school that's taking the brunt of the consequence for the fact that the tax rate really is not going up so much as it is that the valuations have been manipulated to be up in there. So we're looking at all that. So those things are parts that we're really looking at improving. I think our parents have been very supportive of the things that we've been able to do. And I think that that's one of the beauties of a small town school district. I can tell you that Edna ISD is probably the largest employer in Edna. And so that becomes the big part of the economic backbone in most of these small districts, especially when you start talking rural communities. All you have to do is drive through areas of the nation where those communities have lost their school, and you're going to find a community that's significantly less than what it was before that happened. Because you're losing people that are college graduates that have kids that maybe necessarily don't live in Edna if they're not working at the school. And I think that's a big part of what people lose track of, is that there's a bigger piece to the puzzle than just what's the cost of educating one student. It's the cost really of all the economic development that comes into that community. Because most people that relocate to a community look at the quality of the school system that's in that area. That is a big part of it. I've served on a lot of economic development councils, a lot of different chambers of commerce. That is a part when you're talking about trying to recruit businesses or whatever into the area. The quality of the school system that they'd be asking their people to move into is a component of that. And I think that people have the right and to choose to do private school or homeschool. I think there are people that do a great job with that option. And there are people that don't do a great job with that option, just like there are public schools that some are better and some are not as good. We have to recognize where the deficiencies are and work to fix it. And I think that's all part of it. But I don't think you rob Peter to pay Paul if you're already looking at places where you're economically deficient. You know, special education dollars and everything else as far as throughout the state has had a long history of being less than what it needs to be. But yet that's one of the biggest pieces that gets us into trouble as far as writing plans of improvement or accountability issues or anything else. But you have to actually put the resources into it to help it. You know, if mental health is a big situation, then we need to do something to try to address counseling, mental health, and whatever. You know, social emotional learning was one of those things that got pushed out. It's gotten to be where it's a political football now. But at the same time, there are a lot of kids out there in all of these communities that after COVID and before COVID or whatever, have a lot of emotional needs that need to be met that may or may not be met at home. And we have to be cognizant of that. And we also have to realize that everybody that goes to school here in Edna or any other local or rural area, we're not all the same. That's why there's 75 different churches half the time in all these different areas. Everyone's going to have a different idea as to what is their ideal moral foundation. And I think that the school is here to teach the basics, to teach the reading, writing, arithmetic, all that, career and technical education. But we're missing the boat if we don't know that there are needs that have to be met within these kids and adults that are involved in the system that emotionally and psychologically have to be met before they can be productive or successful in what they're doing. So whether that's political or not, those are things that we deal with on an everyday basis. And, you know, we don't pick and choose what the kid needs to talk about or wants to talk about. But most of us are here, whether it's coaches or teachers or administrators or counselors, we're here to meet those needs as they arise and try to help those kids navigate their way through the difficult decisions that we all had to make when we're growing up and trying to turn into an adult. And there's a lot of confusing things out there. And when I was growing up, we didn't have the world of social media and cell phones, which then throws a whole nother layer into the problem. And all of those things have to be navigated, even when we don't want to. There's a lot of times the school gets pulled into things that we didn't expect or ask to be part of, but that just becomes part of what happens when you're dealing with kids and their emotions and their ability to try to mature and come through that. And I think people have kind of taken some of those issues and made them into things that they aren't. I mean, no one's wanting to indoctrinate kids or anything else, but kids have thoughts and they have issues, they have problems, they have things that they're working their way through. And I can act like they're not there, but in essence, those are things that every school system works with. You know, counselor is one of those things that there isn't enough counseling in the whole state. I mean, that's why if you go to some of the big cities, we got tent cities under the bridge and people sleeping on the sidewalk. There's a lot of mental health issues. There's not enough mental health resources in the whole state, let alone in the schools. And mental health, unfortunately, reaches all the way down into the elementary school. And those are things that everybody deals with or without the resources, and with or without the training that goes along with that. None of these people come with an instruction manual. Had a conversation with a parent today, you know, and every kid is different. Every kid has a different way that they deal with things, and every kid has a different thought process. And we have to change gears and continue to work our way through those things. But, you know, our public schools are the backbone of a lot of these communities, and they're the only resources that some of these communities have. I mean, I know there's a lot of friends of mine that have school systems that actually have health clinics within the school. They're not only dealing with mental health, they're dealing with physical health as well. And for some of these communities, the school is the leading source of resources for whatever the family and whatever needs. I mean, if a family has a problem, a fire, a tragedy, whatever, most of these school systems are going to band together, reach out, be available to offer resources to people. And that's kind of become our calling. And I think we talk a lot about in Edna about Cowboy Family, and it's more than just a motto. I think we actually try to live that on a daily basis. And our family's diverse, and our family sometimes has problems and sometimes does really well. And that's really across the board with everybody. It's hard to compare a public school to a home school or a private school because there are no controls in terms of who's coming and who's not coming, what problems you bring to the table. There's no small sizes to where there's ability to be able to change and do what we want to do within that time frame. Instead, it is a situation where you have to adapt to what you're given and figure out a way to service all those kids. So within the same classroom, you may have an autistic kid with a behavior issue, with a kid that has some other emotional needs, or a dyslexic kid that really struggles to read. And that teacher's asked to constantly change gears and work with that to go through there. So I think sometimes when we beat people up about accountability, and I hear this deal about, kids can't read or whatever, I would disagree that that is the case. I think every kid that I've come through, at least that goes through Edna ISD and the school systems that I've been a part of, which has been a lot over 33 years, I don't think there's too many times that we put a kid out that they cannot do what they need to do to be successful. Now, I can tell you, I think we've done a really good job of creating an accountability system that probably a lot of the adults in town would struggle to navigate their way through the STAR test and the things that we're trying to test them over. It's not just a straight reading test. So if you're telling me that people can't read based upon STAR scores, I would tend to disagree with you, because that's not necessarily the case. And we are always dealing with kids that have issues and modifications and accommodations that they're given in their regular class that they're not able to get on the STAR test, and vice versa. And so it's not really comparing an apple to an apple. It's more of an apple to an orange. And I would just say that if you're going to use that as your main means for whether it's good or a bad school or whatever, I think there's a whole lot more that goes into it than that one-time test. And people that are saying, well, the public schools are failing, there are failing businesses, there are failing charter schools, there are failing private schools, and there are failing public schools. But I don't think the system as a whole is a failure. In fact, I would strongly disagree with that. And I think the numbers speak for themselves in terms of the quality of students that Texas is putting out has gone on to A&M or Harvard or the military academies or something else. I think if it's a failure, you don't ever get to that point. I do think that there are issues in any aspect of society. But I said, I think that those few things that you pick out to try to use as a excuse for why you think you don't need to fund the public school system, I think is a fallacy. Because I think the public school system does a huge component and a huge benefit to society and these little communities as a whole. There's a reason why it was written into the state constitution, into the national constitution, that we would have a public school system, because they knew that some people would not have the means to educate their kids at home or send them to a paid for school district. That doesn't mean that you don't have that option to do that. Just like when I go out to buy a car, I can buy a Chevrolet or I can buy a Mercedes. They cost different money. They both get me where I'm going. but one of them has a little bit more luxury, and I'm able to pick out what I want to have in there and what I don't want to have in there. But it's one of those deals that I think that regardless of how you look at it, there are costs associated with doing any of these things. It's a heavy lift to take human beings and try to make them into productive citizens, and at the same time teach them all the basics of reading, writing, science, the arts, all those things that they go through and do that. There's an expense associated with that, a whole different expense than what you would see with, say, a homeschool situation, which I'm not against that. I just think it's comparing an apple to an orange, and you can't talk about what's going on with those things. I think all of us have choices as to what we're going to do. So we have a choice as to what job profession we go into, all those things. Life is full of choices, but some of these things like hospitals, roads, law enforcement, first responders, public schools, whatever, I think they're important enough services to the communities that they serve that's why they are written in as a component that the state's going to fund. And I think if we really sit back and recall our civics lessons that we all learned when we went through school, those are the things that we're looking for, and those are the things that we're trying to get done. So I think that's been a big component of kind of what we're doing. It's unfortunate where we find ourselves now. I do think that, in terms of Texas and the people that have looked at vouchers, vouchers are not some magical secondary fund source somewhere. It has to come from something. The state budget is what it is. It's a balanced budget every year. So if you're going to pull out X number of dollars, it has to come from some other program. Now, I would love to say that it's the students coming out of the public school that are now going to be funded through vouchers, but that's not the case. If you look at almost every voucher program across the country, the majority of people who take advantage of the vouchers were the kids that were not in public schools to begin with. They were already in the other system, and all you're doing is supplementing their enrollment, which for some people, they think there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is you're taking away resources that were already like in the bottom 6 or 7 states in the union in terms of funding of school systems, and you're going to make it less. Teachers do a big job every year for not a lot of money, and there's a lot of stressors involved with it. And I think we contribute to that stress when we can continually fight over the money. But I've been in 3 different states in terms of the education business. Every state government, 50+% of the budget is public education. And so why does that happen? And why do people come after that money? Because it's there, and it is the biggest piece of pie in terms of the state budget. So there's a lot of eyeballs that are always on that, because it is most things in the free enterprise world come down to money. And so whenever there's a grant that comes out, I get 1,000 vendors that are going to call me about that specific thing that I need to address the grant or the new law that came out. It's the same thing. If you're talking about being able to peel away big layers of the public education budget, then you're talking huge amounts of money. And the sad thing about it is that our system is built completely on accountability. We have to do computer submissions on academics and financials and everything else and justify every dollar that we're given. But we're going to talk about having no accountability tied to the voucher system. And the system in other states has been ripe with fraud and had lost lots of different money. But I don't think in the world that we live in now, and we want to talk about being conservative and conservatism and being frugal with our money, I don't know how you can talk in the same light about more or less creating a system that has no accountability built into it. I don't see the conservative part of that. And you're talking about matching it against a system that's already underfunded. You can tell that by the ranking of school funding and the ranking of our teacher salaries. So We've talked about this a lot. We've fought about it. The legislature's defeated it a couple of times, but for whatever reason, we keep bringing it back. And I think the reason is pretty plain. There's a lot of people with a lot of money that are pushing that as the option to go to. But I think that we really have to look very deeply at ourselves and what we're trying to accomplish, and who exactly is this going to benefit. Because if we're trying to benefit society as a whole and take care of those that need the help, then we don't need to take resources away from school districts that are underfunded. Most schools that fall into that quote unquote failing category and not performing are in communities of huge poverty and low SES and under-resourced and underdeveloped. And so, are you throwing good money after bad? That's yet to be proven, because most of those places have never had resources poured into them. It's been my finding that most kids are very capable of learning and very capable of doing what they're asked to do if they're given an equal playing field and if they're given the resources that they need. Most of them that have a deficit, it's an experience deficit. It's a vocabulary deficit. It's what they came to school with in terms of differences, and can they fill that deficit in the time frame that they're able to do and still keep up with the state's version of what their curriculum is supposed to look like. That's been the problem, is that they come with a deficit and we're trying to fill the deficit at the same time, meeting the stringent, fast-paced accountability of the curriculum needing to be taught at that grade level. So it makes for a difficult situation. But all kids can learn, all kids do learn, all kids are doing, for the most part, a good job. But there are definitely some differences. There are definitely some districts that have more than others, and there's some areas that have more resources than other areas. And anybody who says those resources don't make a difference, all you have to do is go across the state and track performance. And I guarantee you there's a reason why the places that have high resources also have high performance rates. And so they are tied together. There is some things, and it does make a difference. I think that's well documented. All you have to do is look at the money that was poured in after COVID. We had the big COVID slump when everybody was not in school and doing remote. The federal government poured a bunch of money into COVID. We did tutorials. We hired extra people to tutor. We hired extra people for resources. The scores jumped tremendously. So I don't think that anybody that really looks at the numbers can say that that doesn't make a difference. And vice versa, when you take resources away, then you're going to lose performance. There's no doubt about that. We're already operating in a system that makes it difficult to hire people because they don't feel like they're appreciated and they don't feel like they're resourced well enough to be successful. And if you're going to hold them accountable, then give them the tools that they need to try to reach that success rate of accountability. And that would be the biggest piece that I would say about all of that.
All right.
Mhm.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Connor. That was a lot of great information around your topic. Corinne, anything you want to add on your side?
Yeah, well, I mean, so many things. I mean, you touched on so many things that are important to me. I was in a very small district as a trustee. One thing you mentioned, like social emotional learning, as a political football, and I think that's just we tend to pick things, I think, to make political when they really shouldn't be. And I wish we didn't do that. I wish we could just all see our students as we're all here to work together for our students. But and so yeah, I'd love to, like, did you see that as being something 20 years ago we would be discussing? And I think what I mean by that is I'm trying to think of what's the next thing that we need to be prepared for. Vouchers for sure, teachers the turnover rate. I mean, there's so many things we need to be on the horizon right now, but did you see that the social emotional learning would be something that would be a political football like 20 years ago? Did we miss the warning sign that people would be fighting over this today? And
Uh,
maybe a secondary question is like, what do we need to be prepared for in the future so that we can not have these things divide us in public ed?
yeah, this is just my opinion, but social emotional learning really came about or got to be a hotter and heavier subject, and it was actually mandated that we start looking at trying to address those issues, and it happened after the COVID, and we were all shut down, and the suicide rate for kids went through the roof, and so we actually had a momentary place and time where we actually made decisions that were good for kids. Let's see if we can address these kids, tell them that it's okay to think what they think, to be who they are, and to do the things that they need to do. Because when they were by themselves and solo out there in the world of remote learning, it's difficult for people who are actually social in nature. And so when we came back, then a lot of this information and programs and curriculum was sold to us. But then as we got into it, and it really played itself out this year in the legislature, then it got more about, well, are we teaching kids that it's okay to be gay, or that it's okay about transgenders, or that it's okay to have two moms or two dads? And that's what it turned into more than when I say a political football, because now if I say anything about social emotional learning, people are going to, first thing they're going to say is, oh, well, that's some woke propaganda stuff. No, and in reality, where do we talk to kids about their feelings and what they're, because not all of them go home and talk to people. And I'm not saying that's a bad parenting. I raised 3 kids myself. I don't know that they came to me with all of the issues.
Right.
They had friends, they had other people and mentors that they worked with. And so giving somebody something to be able to talk to kids about, yes, it is okay. Some kids are different. I'm sure there's a lot of people think I'm a very different person than other people. And, sometimes you're liked and sometimes you're not liked. And, the whole thing about bullying is pointing out places where people are different than the kids who are in the popular part. And then they pick at that area over and over again. And it becomes difficult now. That's why we talk about counseling and mandatory counseling and then clergy in the school and everything else. But, the problem is every time we come up with a program that we put out there to try to help kids to make good decisions or to help them through the process of growing up, somebody's going to come back and have something negative to say about it because that's not in their value system. I had some people, parent the other day, talk to me about, we're talking to little kids about what makes you sad, what makes you happy, what makes you this. It's just one of the SEL things that we do as a component out with the PE class. And they didn't like it because it was called SEL. And, we're mandated to do it, but then we've done such a bad job of calling everything that we do in terms of trying to help kids woke or indoctrination that now it becomes difficult to be able to do those things. And to me, that's when, we politicize the whole thing about dealing with kids' differences, dealing with kids' problems, dealing with kids' mental situations. None of
I
that.
saw, oh, go ahead. Well, I saw a meme the other day that said, like, if I'm going to indoctrinate your students, I'm going to have them wear deodorant and do their homework. And I love the simplicity of that, like from a teacher in
Yeah.
your next door school. Like, what we really just want kids to like shower. If you have running water, right? Like there's an assumption there that like they may have all that, but for the average student or maybe just like please just do your homework. Please
Right.
bring your, please
Right.
just please be kind. And I think
Yeah.
that's we I feel like in a way we missed out on an opportunity, and I hope conversations like this with our our podcast and the summit and other conversations that leaders can have, that we get back to this idea that it was not a great time in history. I didn't like it at all in COVID. And we then we know that students need and benefit from interaction with leaders and people that love them. That's something that we all know. And so what can we learn moving forward? Because we know that kids need love and when they need to be educated. And then I think of Gary and your business connection of like, but then they're going to have a job. So what are we doing to make them, what are we doing with public ed to make them be prepared for their next step once they leave us? And I think that's where we all can come together and keep having this dialogue. How can we take what we know from the past and do what we know best and keep going forward? You also mentioned that you had good turnover rate. You didn't have a high turnover rate with your teachers, and so commend you for that, because so many districts can't say that. And so good job on that. You mentioned another thing, you mentioned cowboy family. I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit more? Well, first let's check and see if there's questions. So if there's not any question, will you talk a little bit more about that cowboy culture?
Yeah, I've been here now 10 years, and I really think that and when I first got here, there were some identified, issues in terms of academics and some accountability problems and just what I call culture problems as a whole. And I really think that as a leader, I don't teach very many kids. I don't go out there and serve the lunches on a daily basis. So what do you do to contribute to the success of the program? And I think the biggest thing when we got here and when I talked to the leadership team was that we were going to redo our brand and we were going to change the culture, and we were going to talk positively about the things that we do, accent the things that we do well, acknowledge the things that we need to change and get and improve, and talk about becoming a cowboy family, because there was a lot of what I call infighting and things that first happened. And with any system, I don't care if it's a business or a hospital or whatever, if people don't feel supported and they don't feel like there's a common direction, then before you know it, we're all climbing over each other to get to what we're wanting to get to. And so I think the cowboy family piece, and we put it on all of our emails, what we push out in terms of propaganda, what our social media feed, we do a lot of things with Cowboy Up, Cowboy Family. It's kind of a thing that we like to talk about, that I'm happy when you're successful, and therefore I hope that you're happy when I'm successful. And if we're both successful, then guess what? The organization is successful. And I think that that's kind of fed upon itself. And like I said, with the retention bonuses and trying to time it out at Christmas, doing some things, the board has been very supportive. Anytime we do an in-service, we feed everybody, get together. Not so much that it's about eating, it's about fellowship and being around each other in a different circumstance, because when the kids are there and we're in school, it's a hectic pace and things are flying at you all the time. And so to be able to sit around your colleagues and have a simple adult conversation and enjoy something and talk positively about the direction of the system and things that we could do better, I think has really gone a long way towards creating a little pride in the system. And I say that for the kids too. I think success breeds success. And when the kids are successful, the teachers feel good, the community feels good. We really have a good, positive deal. Now, the problem with that is it only takes one bad, negative situation to happen to really pop that balloon for a while, and it'll take you a while to put air back in it again. But luckily, knock on wood, we've been able to do a few things right here lately and celebrate those successes. And I think everybody likes to see good things about their kids. And so it creates that culture, I believe.
Love it. Love it. No, This is awesome. You know, I've been saying this all day with the different speakers we've had on. Everybody's covering a different topic. Everybody's covering a different perspective, but I think all of these things combined really create something special. You know, if we can pick up some little nuggets, whether it be those that are listening live or if you're listening to the recording right now, hopefully you're you know, even if you don't agree with everything, right? So not everyone is going to agree with everything, but you can still hear a different perspective and expand your horizon a little bit. So, and that could be for any of the topics, right? Um, so very interesting topic. So anything else, Superintendent O'Connor, that you want to expand on that you've covered today?
No, I mean, I do think that I do a lot of things on social media as Cowboy Superintendent, and I read a lot of things about things that are going on around there, and I do think that, like I said, I've been in 3 different states. I've been in a lot, probably 14 different school districts. Every community is different. They have their own unique personality. They have their own unique values that they really want to push and go through. And I think part of being a successful school system is realizing what those things are and then looking to address and actually mesh into that. And so I think that's why a lot of people are so passionate about the public school system, is that for a lot of these smaller towns, you know, it's different if you're in Austin or Dallas or Houston. It'd be not that they don't have public school pride or anything else, but if you're living way out in the woods, so to speak, or where there are no woods, it's just straight prairie, community and civic pride and specifically school pride is huge. I've lived in some very small towns that we were 90 miles from the nearest Walmart, you know, so it is one of those things that the school was the sole source of entertainment for that town. If we were putting on a play or a musical or a concert or a game, everybody that was able to walk, ride, or catch a ride there was at those activities. And I think we can very quickly lose track of how important some of these places are. And I think it's sad when you drive through some of these really rural areas that lost their school system, and you find that economically they just begin to wither away. And I think that's I think we will lose sight of a very valuable piece, because you lose economic capability when you do that, because your college educated people and some of those other ones will now all of a sudden move and leave town. The only ones still there are the ones that had land in that area, and that's not a good economic situation, and the viability of those communities is diminished.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about values, right? So, and this is just, I guess, my ignorance, right? So, do school districts put out statements on what their values are? And the reason why I'm thinking about this is, well, obviously there's a lot of conversation around that right now, just like, you know, what do they stand for outside of, you know, math, science, and social studies, right? You know,
Right.
what are the values? I heard, you know, somebody say at one time, hey, and this was just an extreme version, right? If my student, if their teacher is, you know, if their teacher's extremely overweight, they're communicating a message that they don't care about health, right? And then there's other conversations that are said outside of, you know, your typical academic, some values that are communicated, maybe they're nonverbal, or sometimes verbally. I know when I was getting my MBA, I had a professor, had nothing to do with the class. He just happened to make a comment about a certain presidential candidate at the time, and it's like, well, why are you even mentioning this? So sometimes things get said that are, you know, not part of the curriculum, or things are communicated non-verbally through expressions or whatever. But are there values that school districts put out, say, look, this is what we stand for outside of the, you know, this is, I'm just kind of curious around that. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that, and actually I think within our communication brochures, we talk about some of the values that we really want to accent. But I think the biggest places where it's evident is in your like vision and mission statement that you come through. And those are created through the board, which are locally, elected people that represent your community. But I think that is a very important piece of the process. And I think what the board has to realize is that even though I'm an individual board member that may be a Methodist or a Catholic or a whatever, I also am representing parents that have children that are neither one of those. And they may be something totally different than that, Muslim, atheist, whatever. We have to be careful that our values are holistic enough that we are not exclusionary for anybody else that's there. I think that's the beauty of the public school system, is that we are there hopefully to nurture you and to educate you. But that's why it's very frustrating and ironic, I think, to be talking about teachers indoctrinating kids, because in essence what they do is they care for kids, they nurture kids, they educate kids, and they're going to continue to do that even though they get beat over the head with the stick as far as not doing what some people in the legislature think, or want to politicize things that are out there. But I think for the most part, the system is built around the fact that you have an elected board that is representative of that community, that hires and fires the superintendent, that sets the direction and approves the curriculum. What more local control can you ask for than that's what's going on? Those people get elected or they don't get elected based upon how good a job they do and what their values and how they communicate those values to their constituents. I think it is the epitome of what we would say is the American system. And so to take and put it into places where those boards are not representative of the community, they are not accountable to the community, they are not elected by the community, I would almost say is not as American as what we're doing here. Is it a perfect system? No. That's why we have politicians that we have now. We can all pick out one or two that we don't like, or we could make fun of, or we don't, but somebody voted for them. Somebody put them in there. And so that is the part of the system. And when they finally do enough things that the majority of people are fed up with what's going on, then we have a change. And it's the same thing if you watch school boards. That's why, superintendents go up and down, they're fired, they're listed on the other deal. The community has reacted to something that has happened within that system and decided that it's time to make a change. And so it's very ironic for it to be talking about indoctrination or anything else, because I would personally think that the community is more than capable of policing what's going on with its children and with its educational system, and that they don't need Big Brother in Austin telling them how they should be doing something.
Yeah, that's such a great point. That's such a great point that everybody has the opportunity in their community to get involved as much as if they have an issue, they can get involved. They can get involved, whether that be through the school board or working for the district or whatever it may be. So that's a really good point. Yeah, I was curious about that, because it seems like that topic has come up. Earlier we had a speaker that was more focused like on character development, which was really interesting. And because there's a lot of little nuances, it seems like, that goes into the development of a student and future model citizen in a society than the academics. So that's really great that you shared that. Okay, well, we got a few minutes left. Anything else before we close out today's presentation or discussion?
No, sir. I think probably they've heard more than enough.
Well, I loved it. I'm thankful for your leadership. Your perspective is important, and the culture you shared about with your district, and we really appreciate this. I know our listeners are enjoying all the different perspectives, and I'm thankful for superintendents. I mentioned with the guest before this, that superintendents are among my favorite people on the planet, my best and favorite leaders. And so when I'm struggling and I think of what I want to, when I can't figure out something, I'm thinking, who am I going to call? And the superintendent that I served with prior and all superintendents, I feel like y'all know how to solve problems and get to the root of things faster than almost any other leader. So thank you for your service and your dedication to our students.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity, and thank you for doing something like this, because I think right now we don't do enough in terms of communicating and discussing what's
Mhm.
going on. And if we're not careful, then we're depending upon misinformation that's getting propagated out there. So
For
this
sure.
is a good situation and a good program, and all of us appreciate that you are pushing this out.
Mm,
Good.
thanks. It's lots of fun.
Yes, we appreciate y'all as well. All righty. Thank you, Superintendent O'Connor.
Thank you. Y'all
Thank
have a
you,
good
sir.
rest